guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Hetty. If you are new, I post videos every single Sunday all in relation to eating disorders, health, fitness, lifestyle and travel, and also mindset as well. If you are a regular, you might not even recognise me right now because I'm wearing makeup. Shock. Treat you all and put a little bit of makeup on because normally I understand that most of my videos I look like I've just got out of bed, which is usually quite true. You would have seen this morning I had my coffee and my oats this morning, so that was my breakfast that you just saw in the previous clip. So this video is gonna be a bit of a sit down chat video, all in relation to how to stop eating. So how to stop overeating, maybe how to stop overeating on junk food if that's your issue, but generally how to stop overeating. Now, I will just make a few disclaimers that I'm not a registered dietitian, I'm not a doctor or anything like that. I'm simply using my own experience. I am a qualified personal trainer and have some knowledge and experience within that sense, but this is a lot of things that I've learned myself and also practiced myself, and it's worked for me. So I'm going to be sharing how to stop overeating. Now, before I kind of go into that, I just also want to mention that if you are in eating disorder recovery, then this video will probably not be applicable to you. If you struggle with binge eating, this might be helpful, but I do want to emphasize the point that there is a huge difference between binge eating and overeating. So for this video, I am going to be talking more along the lines of overeating, so compulsive overeating, and I'll go into detail into what actually that is in a second. But if you do struggle with binge eating, I do have actually 2 whole videos on that topic, and I will make some future videos on that as well. That's something I used to struggle with quite a lot, so I will link those down below. So if you do struggle with that and you're maybe experiencing extreme hunger in eating disorder recovery, please don't necessarily really watch this video because it's not going to be helpful to you. I will link those other videos down below because this is sort of a whole different category of people. People who are in eating disorder recovery would need to do something slightly different because it's a different sort of scenario. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be talking about overeating, so compulsive overeating. So I'm going to go into detail on what that is. Now, compulsive overeating, you may not even realize that you are, and I wouldn't even go as far to say that you label yourself as that, but you may not even notice that you do it. It may be something that you may just automatically think, well, I need to go on a diet to control this. And that's usually something that I see a lot of people do. They have this habit and they don't even realize that it is a habit. And so the natural and normal thing to do is, sorry, I've got a call coming through. Jeez, for that, I get distracted very, very easily. It's a Gemini thing. Yes, so people that overeat, normally they don't realize that it's actually a habit that they've developed. And so the natural normal thing that society definitely influences us to sort of follow through on is, well, you clearly cannot be controlled, or you're out of control, so you need to diet as a way to stop this, which isn't really true. So when we talk about overeating, I'm referring to people that naturally, now, like I said, if you don't know the difference between binge eating and overeating and you're sort of thinking, am I a binge eater or am I an overeater, definitely watch the video on binge eating that I'm going to link down below. There's 2 of them, what to do after a binge, which goes into the detail of what actually is binge eating and the difference between binge eating and overeating. But in summary, somebody who is sort of a compulsive overeater or just tends to overeat quite a bit, this person may, go out for dinner and let's say they go out to an all-you-can-eat restaurant and there's a lot of food available and they get a really, really big portion without even thinking about it. And maybe they're not so in touch with their hunger signals, so they can't tell whether or not they're super hungry or not. They may go down and eat the food, and they'll eat it all without really thinking about it. Maybe it's a habit that they've developed through, finishing everything on their plate. I know that's quite a common thing for a lot of people. So I've got this on my plate, so therefore I need to eat all of it. Another example of this would be, maybe they're sharing a pizza with their partner and they eat the whole pizza, and they may be, they overeat and stuff themselves. They eat either a whole takeaway or a whole pizza to themselves, and there's no guilt or shame in there. They tend to just feel straight after they're like, oh, I need to unbutton my jeans and, put some stretches on. But they would do this in a social situation, so there's no secrecy around it. They would do it in a social situation, but they tend to not even think twice about eating the whole thing. And then after, that's when they realize, oh God, I've eaten, I feel quite full and I feel quite uncomfortable. And they may eat a whole packet of biscuits and not really think about it, and they almost feel like compelled to carry on eating until something's finished. But again, the difference is it's not, they will probably eat the whole packet of biscuits and then be finished. They wouldn't think, right, I need to go and eat more. It would just be, eating a large amount of food in one sitting, maybe a meal out, or, chocolate and things like that. And they wouldn't feel any guilt or shame around it. They would do it in a social situation, so there's no secrecy behind it. So that's the kind of major difference, I would say, with somebody who is a compulsive overeater and someone who binge eats, which, like I said, this video is not for binge eating. It's more so for people that just tend to overeat, which can, there can be people that binge eat as well as overeat as well. I would say that, some people do fit into that category. I know I definitely did. So if you do struggle with mainly binge eating, please go and watch those videos down below. I will link them all down below for those people that are, under different kind of categories. So as I said, these types of people maybe don't even realise that they have this particular habit. They don't even view it as a habit, maybe. So the normal, natural thing for them to do is to, start a diet because that's the thing to do. And that's obviously what we are told all the time in diet culture. And it kind of reinforces that belief on us that we can't be trusted and that we can't trust our natural hunger cues, because when we don't have a diet to fall back on, we will naturally overeat. So that's something I definitely disagree with. And if you follow me, you know that I eat intuitively and I trust my body's hunger cues. And that's taken me quite a long time to get to that place. But I do believe that we are capable of trusting our own hunger cues and, falling at a natural, healthy weight for our bodies. However, I don't particularly disagree with people that are wanting to achieve weight loss if that is their goal. But I think the underlying reasons all need to be addressed first. And if that is for you either binge eating, obviously before you even want to consider trying to lose weight, first you need to address the binge eating habit first. And like I said, I will link that down below. And likewise with overeating, I think before you can address trying to actively achieve weight loss, I think first you need to address the underlying issue of the compulsive overeating habit that you've got. And I'll just point out that it is definitely not impossible. If this is your goal, you can definitely achieve that. So let's talk about overeating, compulsive overeating. Now, the reason why you compulsively overeat, believe it or not, is not because you lack willpower. It's not because you're not motivated enough. The main issue of why you are doing this habit is because you've developed a strong habit around maybe overeating at certain times or overeating on certain foods. The important thing to remember about compulsive overeating is you wouldn't do it unless you had cravings or urges to do it. So if you think of somebody that doesn't have this problem, the only reason that separates them from you is because they don't have these almost compulsive and overriding really strong urges to, you know, eat slightly more than what they need to, or overeat, or, you know, eat 2 cookies instead of 1. These people don't have that strong urge in their mind. Now, an urge, it feels very sort of compulsive and that it needs to happen. Now, if you think about a time when you have had a really strong craving for something, maybe it's chocolate. When you experience this craving, it feels like you can't really think about anything else. It's just like dominating your mind, and you're like, the more you think about it, the more powerless you tend to feel, and to whatever that thing that you're craving. So chocolate, for example, the more you start to think about, oh my God, I shouldn't want this, and it starts to take over our mind even more. And it gets to a point in which we can't almost take our mind off it. No matter how hard we try, it's like all we want is that. And, you know, in that sense, we might go to the shops, we might order something, we might order a takeout, we might choose to overeat on something, whatever sort of form it is. But the key thing to remember here is that the reason why you overeat is because you have urges and cravings to overeat. Without those present, you wouldn't do it. Okay, now the real issue that we need to address is how to handle these cravings so that they start to disappear. Now, if you know anything about habits in particular, so a habit is something that we have done repeatedly over and over, whether it be, you know, drinking, eating, exercising. We could have any type of habit, like, you know, mine, for example, when I come downstairs, I instantly want to make a cup of coffee. I barely go a morning without having a cup of coffee. That's just my habit. So no matter what our habits are, we've created them through basically repetition. Through repetition, our brains now associate that particular action with almost like a sense of survival. So when we don't do it, it's like we know about it and we feel really, really uncomfortable when we don't act on those urges. So our brain will send out urges to do that action again and again and again, so that it almost sets in stone that habit. So once we've repeated something over and over, it becomes and forms a habit. Okay, which is really to make our life a lot more easier. Our brains doesn't do it to, you know, do us any harm, although some of our habits can be quite harmful. But our brains are doing that basically to save us energy. If we had to think about every single time and really make the effort to do each one and every habit that we have, in driving your car, that's all a habit. So when you're changing gears, your brain now does that automatically. It's a habit. Whereas if it wasn't a habit, life would be so much more difficult. It would be so mentally taxing. So our brains form these habits very, very easily over our use of repetition of them. Now, the difference with this is obviously with overeating, this is something that we've repeated for a long time, perhaps. So for me, for example, when I was a kid, thinking back when I was very, very young, I wasn't aware, but I had a babysitter, and not blaming it on her, but she used to give me a lot of junk food. Basically whatever I wanted, I kind of got, including gifts and things and toys, which is obviously, you know, I'm very privileged to have had that. However, growing up, it was very much like if I wanted a chocolate bar, if I wanted a McDonald's, I would get it. Now, if you give that to a child, then over time, obviously, the child's going to be very, very dependent on it. So I never realised, obviously growing up, that was the issue. Now, because that was repeated so much, because every time I wanted something, I kind of got it straight away. And when we do a habit, usually we get a reward from it. So I would definitely recommend, side note, if you are wanting to look into this even more, I would definitely recommend the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. He goes into a lot more science about how habits are formed. So I will link that also down below if you want to check that out. But it's a really, really good book. But the thing is, especially what James talks about in that book, is that whenever we do a habit repeatedly, there needs to be some kind of reward for it. If there's no reward, we wouldn't do it. So think about all the habits that you have on a day-to-day basis. What kind of rewards do you get from it? Maybe it's exercise. That first initial feeling of going for exercise you might not really want to do, but over time we get that reward of either feeling stronger, we feel fitter, we get that feeling afterwards, the endorphin rush feeling of feeling really good about ourselves. Equally, with me, especially when I was growing up, I was eating all of this junk food and that started to become a habit for me. Now, junk food especially, certain foods, will give us a dopamine hit. So dopamine is sort of the pleasure hormone, if you like, within our brain. So that was sort of my reward, if you like. I felt, obviously, whenever we eat fast food or, junk food and things like that, we do get sort of a dopamine hit because it tastes good. But over time, the more we sort of repeat this action, our brains tend to associate that dopamine hit with that being a need for survival. So again, our brains are trying to make this habit easier for us so we don't need to think about it. So the more that we repeat something, the more ingrained it gets within our brain. So our brains then attach this dopamine hit for almost like a sense of survival, that it needs to act on this. So that can be why sometimes when we are having cravings and urges to maybe overeat on foods or maybe even alcohol, it almost feels really, really strong, and that it's more powerful than us and something that we need to act on. Now, this, like I said, is usually a combination of between the habit and the dopamine response within the brain. Our brain is seeking out that dopamine hit, which we can get from other things as well. It's not just food that we can get this dopamine hit from. Actually, if this is a habit that you are wanting to break, one thing I would recommend just maybe thinking about, I definitely wouldn't say, you need to cut out all junk food. Some people are happy to do that, some people not so much. But I think if we are trying to end this sort of overeating, compulsive overeating, reducing, or emphasis on the word reducing, not eliminate. I'm not saying that anybody needs to eliminate all these foods altogether. But I would say if you notice that majority of your diet is coming from processed foods, so a lot of pizzas and, highly processed foods, takeaways maybe, that could potentially be what's maybe increasing those urges to overeat. Now, the reason I'm saying this is not because I don't believe that foods are good and bad. The one thing I would say regarding foods that are a lot more processed is when our bodies are hungry. So when we are hungry, our cells get hungry for food as well. So our cells require energy. Now, the difference between whole foods and processed foods is when we eat processed foods, we're not actually feeding all of the cells. Our cells, we get fed physically, but we don't always feel satisfied after. And that's because our body isn't getting the correct amount of nutrients that it requires. So that can be how, and I'm speaking from experience here, that, if you've had, say, a McDonald's, you eat the food and a few hours later you're still hungry, yet you might have actually eaten quite a large amount of calories within that meal, maybe a burger and fries, and you're still left feeling hungry. Whereas if you had that same calorie balance but with whole foods, we're getting a lot more nutrients from the whole food than we would the processed. So the difference is really that what we feed our bodies on, is going to reflect on whether or not our body still requires energy or food after. If we're eating majority of our diet from processed foods, we're not getting the correct amount of nutrients that our body actually requires. So it's going to keep and continue screaming out for food until it gets what it needs. But it's not going to get that if every single meal of ours is, you know, very processed. Like I said before, if you are struggling with an eating disorder, please don't take that into account. Please don't think that you need to cut out refined sugar foods. I don't mean that at all, because people with eating disorders need to take a different approach. This is for somebody who doesn't struggle with eating disorders, to look at where you're getting majority of your meals from. Are they coming from whole foods? So when I say whole foods, I'm talking, you know, vegetables, complex carbohydrates, so things like sweet potatoes, brown rice, much less processed foods, lots of veg, lots of fruit, protein, so meat, chicken, fish, eggs, things like that. And then also fats, so olive oil, avocados, peanut butter, all of those types of things. Need a balance, definitely, but that's just one thing I would say, that if you are, majority of your foods are coming from highly processed, your body is still hungry, so it's still screaming out for those foods, and still screaming out for nutrients that it needs, because it's not getting that from the processed foods. Just eat a more whole, balanced, whole food diet. You would probably notice a big difference in the amounts of cravings that you get. I will also mention that these types of refined and highly processed foods, they are designed to be addictive. The more addictive they are, the more we're going to buy them, of course. So I think the main thing that I would focus on if I was you and I was struggling with overeating is just try to base majority of your meals around whole foods, but of course allow yourself to have, you know, a takeaway or, you know, chocolate. Allow for those sweet treats every now and then too. But sort of the last thing, and I would say the most important thing, so if you are still finding that, you know, even when you're eating whole foods, you're still finding yourself, you know, really wanting to just snack on loads of junk food, and you know, you really feel like you need to eat more food than probably what you need, I would say this comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the habit. So basically, habits are really like a muscle. The more we use them, or the more we act on certain habits, whatever habits they are, the stronger they get. Now that can also happen the reverse. The less we act on a habit, the weaker that urge gets. Now, as I said just before, the only reason why you have this habit is because you have urges, strong urges to do it, and you have repeatedly reacted and acted on these urges and cravings every time you've had them. The important thing to understand is that if you've acted on these urges to overeat for a long time, give yourself the time and space to allow for that. It's not going to be an overnight success. However, remember that the less you act on these urges, the weaker those urges will become. So the weaker they are, you're gonna not even feel them after a while. So it won't even feel like you need to do it. So the less we act on urges, the weaker those urges become. Remember that. Recognize those urges. So the urges to overeat will seem quite strong at first. Maybe you have thoughts in your mind like, you can start again tomorrow. All of these types of urges or thoughts are urges to continue overeating. Now, something I would recommend doing is writing down your those most common thoughts that you have around food. When you're sort of in that situation and those urges come up, recognize them. So beforehand, write down your most common thoughts, and I think just creating that awareness around those thoughts will instantly make them much more easier to break. If we're not aware of them, we will think that there are thoughts. That's why usually overcoming these types of urges are really hard at first, because we think that it is us, and the difference is it's not us. It's simply our urges. It's simply our habit that we have formed. You are not your habit. Remember that. If you procrastinate, you're not a procrastinator. You have a habit of procrastinating. If you overeat, you're not an overeater. You have a habit of overeating. So change your perspective on this. When you have those urges come up, notice them first off and think, oh, is this an urge? Is this that craving that I normally get? Now, the key difference here is to observe those thoughts, okay? Not get sucked into them. If you want to know in detail about those urges, I have a video on binge eating, but I would say that the urges are very, very similar on what to do with them. But in short, you want to observe those urges in your mind, almost like a fly on the wall. So you're almost like looking in and hearing those urges as if somebody's talking to you. Now you can either engage in a conversation with that person, or you can just simply ignore them. Okay, now the difference is, and what you want to do in order to break this habit, is you need to start ignoring those urges. That's going to help you ignore those urges and not act on them. So the key here is to not act on those urges, because we know when we act on them, we reinforce them to get stronger. So we need to not act on them. But the way, and the easiest way to not act on them, is to not engage within them. Just simply as if somebody is literally standing next to you and screaming. Okay, you could either engage with that person and talk to them, or say, why are you talking to me? Why are you shouting at me? Or you could simply just be present and think, that person's screaming at me. I wonder why they're doing that. That's interesting. So you don't have to react. Remember, you don't need to react to these urges. And the biggest thing here is it takes practice. Okay, so the more you can practice on not acting on these urges, the weaker that they are going to become. The weaker they are, eventually they will start to disappear altogether, and you won't have this habit because you won't have those urges to act on. So always remember, in that moment you have a choice. Next time you have them come up, really try and distance yourself from them. Okay guys, so that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found that video useful as well. Please let me know in the comments down below what kind of videos you would like to see. At the moment, I'm enjoying these sort of sit down videos to kind of, you know, help as many people as I can. I just want to remind you guys that whether you're struggling with an eating disorder, binge eating or overeating, you can overcome this. It is 100% possible. Remember, it's a habit. It's nothing more. It's nothing about you as a person. Please follow me on Instagram. I will link my Instagram below as well, and I also have a free 5-step guide on overcoming emotional and binge eating. So it's a little guide, free to download, and I will also link that down below as well as my free private Facebook group that I've set up mainly to just help encourage people as well. So please join if that's something that you're interested in. It is a private group, so I don't just accept, you know, just anybody. Obviously only people that want to be there and want to help each other as well. So that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you found that helpful. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Comment down below any kind of videos that you want to see more of as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.